This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
As I've been discussing in the previous podcast, there's a mix to innovation. Now, that mix consists of organic innovation, which I talked about in last week's podcast, innovation from mergers and acquisitions, and innovation from co-innovation. Now, this week's podcast, I'm going to focus just on innovation via mergers and acquisitions. Now, there are primarily two types when I talk about innovation from M&A. One is acquiring outright a company. That includes all of its assets, its people, its intellectual properties, its current products, customer list, sales force, etc. The second type of innovation from mergers and acquisitions is the case where you purchase the intellectual properties, patents, products. You may just acquire a product line. You may acquire a team, a group of individuals with core expertise. So those are the two primary types, acquiring an entire company or purchasing IP. Now, innovation from mergers and acquisitions has both pros and its cons. Pros, you get into the market fast. You don't have to wait for multi-years or multiple decades of R&D. You can acquire somebody and immediately get into that market. It also has reduced risk. You're typically doing these acquisitions after the other company has proven out the technology, products, customers, they have a revenue stream, and therefore it becomes attractive. Now, one of the first cons I want to talk about, though, is that with that reduced risk comes lower returns. It's hard to get a return when you pay money for an acquisition because the other company has taken all that risk and rolled it into the R&D. The fact that you acquire them after they've proven it, therefore it's lower risk, inherently you get a lower return. The other con is that innovation via mergers and acquisition can make an organization lazy. That reduced risk is seductive. You don't have to run the risk of having a project blow up in your face and then try to have to explain it to your boss as to why it didn't work out. And many executives will fall back on mergers and acquisitions as one of their preferred methods, again, because this reduced risk, and nobody ever wants to have, quote, a failure attached to their name. They never want to have to explain to the boss or to the board as to why an innovation or an R&D program didn't work out. So this avoidance of risk can be very seductive. The other con is that it can be very expensive. You can't get home runs regularly on an M&A type of an approach. Just as I talked before about reduced risk means lower returns. Some people have this false hope or false sense of, I'm going to buy it just at the right time and I'm going to maximize that benefit. You may get a few lucky hits on that, but inherently innovation that results from M&A, meaning you're acquiring some unique capability and having that play a huge upside in the near term, is very, very hard to do unless you acquire them when there's still a significant portion of that risk. So when you do the M&A, meaning when do you take additional risk, is directly attributed to then the returns that you can potentially have. But again, it gets back to that risk, meaning the risk of it not working out. And typically most senior executives want to try to minimize risk. And in many cases, they're willing to trade off upside potential in order to reduce that risk. Now, let me get into a little more detail about addressing this comment about organizations becoming lazy with an M&A approach. Now, the most common reason for M&A as R&D, meaning I'm acquiring a company is in relation to my innovation strategy, is the fact that in most organizations, they have failed to foresee the trend. Some new trend emerges, and the organization just totally misses it. Never saw it coming. They get surprised. And what do they have to do? They have to go out and acquire a company in order to get into a space that they should have been in. The other case is they saw the trend, but they didn't believe it was going to become as big as it is. Oh, it's a little blip. These little companies are off thinking about it. And the third is they saw the trend, but were totally unwilling to invest because of, quote, the risk problem. Yes, we could have invested 5 years ahead of time. And in many cases, when you look back 5 years, that R&D cost could be upwards of 1/10 the cost of doing the acquisition today. But it was this view of the risk associated with that. So these are three of the more common excuses that I get from senior executives when I kind of poke on them pretty hard as to their M&A strategy with regards to R&D. You go back and you look at maybe the last set of acquisitions that they've done. Why did they do it? Why didn't they drive an organic R&D program? Did it make sense to do an organic R&D program? And what were how'd they miss the ball? How did they miss that this new area was going to emerge that drove an M&A strategy? So again, they failed to foresee the trend, meaning they totally get blindsided. And that happens to everybody. You can't be perfect hitting it out of the park every time. Second, they saw the trend, but they didn't believe it was going to happen. Or third, they saw the trend, but they were unwilling to invest because of the risk associated with it. Now, M&A does work if it's proactive and part of your innovation strategy. Are you acquiring competitors to secure some kind of a key position? So are there 5 competitors in the space, and by acquiring a key competitor and coming together, you carve out a segment of that market with patents and customer base and sales force and reach and brand that would make other competitors hard to come after you? That is one strategy to drive your innovation through acquisition and finding those complementary companies that combined with yours give you added strength. The other is you acquire to gain a position in an adjacency where you have no skill, you have no experience, or you have no capability. It's an adjacency that you can see your organization eventually getting into, but you don't have the core capabilities today. You don't have the people skills. And so therefore the acquisition is not only to acquire the innovation pipeline from this new organization, but you're building up a skill, capability, and a position in a logical adjacency that you want to get into or you should be into today. So again, M&A is worth it if it's proactive, meaning you're not all of a sudden finding yourself in a jam and you're trying to acquire companies just to drive a top-line revenue number. M&A works if it's part of your innovation strategy, and that includes acquiring competitors or acquiring companies in the space in order to secure a key position, meaning it's something that is part of a conscious decision as part of a long-term innovation program. Or secondly, you're acquiring to gain a position in an adjacency where you don't have that skills or capabilities or experience. Again, all part of a well-thought-out, long-term innovation strategy, and you avoid kind of this reactionary. Now, what I've been talking about here is primarily about the process of acquiring companies. As I mentioned in the introduction to the podcast, there is a second type of M&A activity when it comes to innovation, and that includes purchasing intellectual properties. Now, why is purchasing IP so important these days? Well, one is IP litigation, patent lawsuits is becoming more and more of a distraction to most organizations. It's becoming such a significant issue that it's a constant conversation within governments, within international trade organizations, within ecosystems, companies that co-optate, meaning they cooperate and compete at the same time. How do you deal with this IP ownership? IP, intellectual properties, patents, trade secrets are held by companies as a way of getting some form of exclusivity to the ideas that they generate following their investment. Now, for smaller companies, that's hard to do. You may go into a space and you've got a big company in the industry that has key patents. There are ways to go about this. One is you can go off and try to buy patents. They can be very, very expensive, as evidenced by the acquisition of the Nortel patents into the billions of dollars, and some other recent acquisitions to just buy companies just to get to their patent pool. The other is to join a patent pool. Team up with people in your industry. Pool your dollars so no one company has to go off and buy the entire patent. You have to go out and acquire a patent pool just to protect yourself, but that you can go out and pool your dollars. There are these group purchases where groups come together around large numbers or pools of patents, throw money into the pot, and in exchange, everybody who throws money into the pot to acquire this set of patents automatically gets a license. Now, I'm going to throw out a radical idea here. Now, this is a program that I put in place at my previous company, and if you are part of a large corporation or even a small corporation, I'd like for you to think about this approach, and that is if you are ever a seller of patents, particularly large organizations, as you build up your patent pools, you'll find patents in your offering that you no longer need given directions or changes or strategies within your organization and in the industries you serve. And it makes a lot of sense to sell those patents to others who are operating in that space, particularly given the cost of the maintenance fees affiliated with patents. However, what I would ask for you to at least think about is that if you are a seller of patents to others, write it into your agreement that prevents the purchaser from using your patents in proactive litigation. Allow the patents to only be used in defense. Why do people acquire patents? One is they want to exert them so they have some form of control, right? But that's fine for their own R&D. If they're acquiring your patents, in many cases, they're acquiring patents in order to create a defense. Either they've already been sued or they have fear of being sued. So write into your agreement that prevents the purchasers from using your patents in proactive litigation, meaning they cannot go out and sue using your patents. They can only use it in defense. Why is this important, and why should this become the standard in the industry? Because it immediately makes your patents unattractive to patent trolls. Patent trolls are typically law firms or individual organizations whose sole purpose is to buy patents and sue. They don't produce anything. In many cases, they're not even the original inventor of the idea, right? And these patent trolls are taking advantage of the laws and the structures and the way the patent system works to literally take money out of the innovation value within industries. So again, I put this in place. I would encourage you to think about putting this in place. Prevent purchasers from using your patents in proactive litigation. They can only use them as defense. Now, it does make it unattractive to trolls, but they are still highly valuable to others in the industry, right? You may not get as much because the trolls will bid your patents way, way up, and that can be an issue with your shareholders and your board and perception. But we need to come up with a radical approach to addressing the patent lawsuit challenges that are happening in the organization. The other is PCLs, patent cross licenses. Particularly large companies don't want to get into the business of suing each other. It's just not productive, and the only people that win are the attorneys. So you'll find that most large organizations pre-negotiate a patent cross license. I automatically get a license to all of your patents. You get a license automatically to all of my patents. We sign the agreement. It has some term, 2, 5, 10 years out. And therefore, then, that takes the whole risk of litigation off the table between those two organizations. And it also changes the conversation when we get into wanting to co-innovate. And I'll talk about that in an upcoming podcast. Having a patent cross license in place opens the door to a level of conversation because you no longer now have to get into who owns the patents. Oh my God, I've revealed something to you. Given that you automatically have a PCL in place, it changes the level of the conversation. So, innovation from M&A needs to be part of your risk, but only if it's done right. Done wrong, M&A can become the model, and therefore you actually de-emphasize the other types of the mix, meaning organic or co-innovation. If you do that, if you only do innovation by M&A, meaning you de-emphasize doing your internal R&D and not doing and avoiding doing co-innovation types of activities, what happens is those other parts of the mix are reduced and capability will be lost. Your R&D teams will not stay in place if you don't use them. Co-innovation, innovating with partners. If you don't find ways to do interesting innovation with your partners, the partners will go someplace else. They'll go to your competitors. So again, innovation from M&A, if it's done wrong, the challenge being then is that you actually destroy your overall innovation capabilities within your organization, and your returns become very, very poor because you're dependent on getting a return from a very high-cost approach to innovating your business. Innovation from M&A, if it's done right, needs to be part of a core innovation strategy. You need an innovation strategy well understood and committed to from all the way up through your senior executives and your board members. If you don't have an innovation strategy, that should be step one before you even think about how do you play this innovation mix. Innovation from M&A done right also fills key areas that you strategically know are important. You've done the trade-off analysis as to what part of the mix you want to do this in. Do you want to do an organic? Nope, this one's an M&A, or this one's a co-innovation. You know that. Everybody's agreed to it, and then you begin the process of identifying the candidates. Now, it is lower risk, and you get a lower return, but it allows for you to be part of that strategic discussion as part of your innovation strategy, and therefore can become part of the mix of offsetting risks against high-risk innovations that you've identified as key being strategic to your group. So hopefully this gives you a good understanding of how I think about innovation via M&A. I'm sure you've had your own experience within your own organization. Some organizations, particularly over the last 5 years, have just gone crazy with doing all kinds of M&A at the risk or the expense of their innovation programs. And I've had lots of discussions with both CEOs and innovation leaders within top organizations. It needs to be a key part of the mix. It can't be the only part of the mix. So keep that in mind. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Please send your feedback, which includes comments, questions, suggestions for future podcasts. You can do that by sending an email to feedback@philmckinney.com, or you can go over to the Phil McKinney site, philmckinney.com, click on the Connect tab, and you'll get a bunch of options on different ways that you can provide feedback or ask questions. With the book being released, a number of listeners have asked about me doing speeches at their events or organizations or companies. Yes, I am booking speeches and appearances in relation to now with the book being out. Please, if you have interest, send me an email to events, events, @philmckinney.com, or you can go over to the philmckinney.com site, click on the Connect contact tab, and just drop me a note, and I'll have the team take a look at it. So if you've got an upcoming event or an organization that you think would be interested in the topic of the book, just let me know. Thanks for your support on the book, by the way. I do appreciate all the emails and comments and tweets and Facebook postings. People have been sending me photographs of the book in their local bookstore. I really do enjoy those. Please keep them coming. Also, help spread the word. I've been doing this podcast and the blog now going on 7 years. If you've been a long-time listener, you know a little bit of the background. I was the beneficiary of an early mentor, and when I asked that mentor how I could pay back all the time and energy he put into my career, he informed me that I couldn't, and the way for me to pay it back was to pay it forward. Teach what I know to others that they can be successful in their careers, and that's really the motivation between both the blog and the podcast. So this is my way of paying it forward. Now, all I ask of you is for you to pay it forward. Spread the word. Let people know about the book, the podcast, link to the site from your site. Talk about the book or talk about the podcast in the social network spaces that you frequent, and I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for the time out of your busy schedule. I truly do appreciate you sitting here listening and giving me feedback and connecting. And we'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.